Thank you all so much for having me here tonight. It's really an honor to be invited to speak with you and to start this event off. The landscape and the environment about sex educations for young people is changing in our country. And I want to talk about some ways that we as a community maybe want to respond to those changes. We face a lot of perceived challenges, including both national and local controversies about what should be taught in sex education. And the growing presence of the online world may mean that may make some people feel that young people are getting the information anyway. And so it may be time to ask, should we close the books on sex education and find other ways to support our young people's health and well-being? The design and the provision of formal sex education builds from some mixture, some concoction of pedagogy, politics, policies, which all come together to influence funding streams, which make a difference. And funding occurs at the national, state, and local levels. But those national funding streams are highly influential, not only for the dollars they bring, but for the policies and tones that they set. Currently, at the state level, policies still emphasize abstinence in school-based education. As of 2017, there are 37 states in the US that require that information on abstinence be provided, and half of states require that abstinence be stressed when sex education is provided in schools. In contrast, there's only 18 states that require that information on contraception be provided in school-based education. This emphasis on abstinence-only programming at schools has occurred despite what is a substantial and growing body of evidence that it doesn't work in delaying sex. That's exactly the outcome these programs are designed to impact, and they don't achieve that goal. Politics often trumps science when it comes to sex education. So how does this funding and policies translate into young people's exposure on the ground day to day? To examine this, I'm going to show you national data that's collected by our federal government. Two different data sources. One surveys schools themselves, and one surveys adolescents and asks them about their sex education experiences. Now, sadly, these data are fairly limited in what sex education topics they ask about and the depth of what we learn about how sex education is taught. And at the extreme, neither of these two data sources has a clear measure of abstinence only until marriage programs. So imagine that. Two different federal offices in charge of two different surveys about sex education, and neither one measures the implication of specific federal policies. Fewer young people report getting the information that they need when they need it. The share getting instruction about birth control has declined over time, while the share who say that they got instruction about abstinence but did not get instruction about birth control increased over time. And by 2014, about 1 in 4 teens were taught how to say no to sex, but not taught about methods of birth control. When sex education does occur, it's often too little, too late. Even messages about abstinence aren't reaching all kids before they first have sex. If we look at this percent of sexually experienced girls who say they got instruction about birth control, it's only about 57%. So about half didn't get instruction about birth control methods before they first had sex. And for boys, these numbers are even lower. On average, the time devoted to this topic is at best a couple of hours over the course of a high school career, despite the fact that women and men in the US will spend 3 decades working to avoid unintended pregnancy. Knowing that teens learned about birth control as a broad topic doesn't really tell us much about what they learned. Did they learn that using birth control is an important way to protect from pregnancy, or did they learn that birth control can't be trusted? Furthermore, when we don't teach about contraception, we signal to young people that perhaps it's shameful or stigmatized or something that should be whispered about instead of addressed directly. In extending this idea, I think that our young people learn a lot not from only what is taught, but from what isn't taught. And we're limited in what we know because of the limitations of the data. So I just want to talk about some topics that I can't measure. We don't know to what extent schools are teaching about consent or sexual harassment. We don't know what steps they're taking so that our next generation is not the me too, but not me. We don't know about how well schools are teaching about sexual diversity. whether they're teaching about sexual pleasure and intimacy, and when they are acknowledging systems of power, oppression, and marginalization that impact our young people. If these things aren't being taught, then what are the lessons that our young people are learning about their community's values and expectations for them? For young people, we want and we should be advocating for quality sex education that does more than just prevent pregnancy. Good sex education, as you all know, should promote healthy sexual development and demonstrate the respect for the rights of all young people to accurate information. And evaluations generally aren't designed to measure any of this. So to make this point, let's think about a Rapunzel sex ed program. I could take my teenage daughter and I could lock her in her tower, and I could measure the effectiveness that she didn't get pregnant while she had that program, while she was in that tower. But I would be failing as a parent, as an educator, as an advocate of adolescent rights. Evidence is important to ensuring quality, but how we get to the outcomes and which outcomes are just as important as well in promoting young people's health and well-being. Is it possible? The answer to increasing and improving sex education is sitting right now in your pocket, in your purse, or on your lap. Maybe the internet provides a cure for all of our sex ed problems. It may feel like a win for us to be able to close the books on formal sex education and the controversy and challenges it brings and move to the safer space of digital media and the internet. So I want to highlight for you a few of the online resources that have been carefully and creatively made by leaders in our field. One of them is Planned Parenthood, Leslie's text chat, with questions and answers available to young people at the tip of their fingers. And this app averages about 20,000 conversations per month. Another is innovative and appealing videos online by Amaze, designed for tweens and young teens, highly accessible and age-appropriate. In October, Amaze posted a video on sexual assault, and it already has more than 40,000 views. We have Bedsider, which is aimed at an older audience of young adults, as the need for accurate information resources continues over the life course. My personal award for the best use of the internet for improving sexual and reproductive health is actually the change to Google. If you go to Google and you type in birth control or you type in IUD, what comes up first is a medically accurate, curated piece of information. A study of 177 sexual health websites found that nearly half had inaccurate information about contraception. Those were sites that were built to provide this information. So imagine what's happening on sites that weren't designed for this purpose, or open forums like Reddit, where users post and answer each other's questions. What's the quality of that information? We also need to recognize that the internet and digital media are not equally accessible for all of our young people. Although the last few years have seen great increases in access, there is still a real digital divide in our country, where young people in poorer households are less likely to have access to smartphones or computers of their own, or even in their home. In this talk, I've highlighted the pullback from formal sex education that's been happening around the country and the challenges that we face in providing quality instruction moving forward. I've reviewed what's happening with digital media and considered the possibility that our work would be better if we just shut the books on formal sex ed. But I really believe that this would be short-sighted and that it would send the wrong message to our young people. We cannot expect our young people on their own to Google their way to good sexual and reproductive health. Technology should support, reinforce, but never substitute for conventional sex ed. We can bring it into our classroom programs and our clinics to speak the language of our digital natives, but we need to assure that there are well-trained, caring educators there as well. The internet and other forms of digital media have the potential to move us into new and uncharted territories. You here tonight are the educators, the innovators, and the creators of content. And I hope in the next days of this conference, you will look for opportunities to build strong linkages between new and traditional means of reaching our young people. But most importantly, I hope for all of us that the next few days invigorate you for the challenges ahead in the field. We cannot close the books on sex ed, but must continue to engage, finding new allies and new opportunities to support the health and well-being of our young people.